Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Little Rock, where love is our teaching and service is our prayer. I'm Patrice O'Donohue. I've been a member of UUCLR since 1990. My husband, Roy Meller, and I raised our 3 kids here. Over the years, I've served in many church roles, and currently, I'm trustee of the Endowment Committee. Several of us here today are volunteers with the Central Arkansas Master Naturalists. Maybe you'd raise your hand. We were really excited when Reverend Paul agreed to participate with us in this weekend's activities for Arkansas Reads Leopold. If you're a newcomer, we're glad you've chosen to join us for worship. While you're here, you can stop by our guest table and fill out a guest card and pick up some information about our church. I now invite our illuminator, Martha Nixon, to come forward to light the chalice and lead us in our affirmation of covenant, which is printed in your order of service.
Land is not merely soil, it is a fountain of energy flowing through a circuit of soils, plants, and animals. Aldo Leopold. I light this chalice with these words. Open our eyes to see what is beautiful. Open our minds to learn what is true. Open our hearts to love one another.
At the end of January, I attended the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association's Institute for the Learning Ministry in Albuquerque. So when I went to choose a passage from the Sound County Almanac for this morning's reading, I was drawn to his essays on his experiences in Arizona and New Mexico. Aldo Leopold wrote quite a bit about how the values of free market capitalism and of the institutional science establishment are often at odds with good stewardship of the earth. He contrasted the economic valuation of the earth as a stock of inputs for production and the economist's emphasis on private self-interest as a guiding value. He contrasted all that with our communal wealth of dust and sunshine. And he had a democratic vision of balancing those values at odds with earth stewardship through education and voluntary activities and associations, particularly education about the role of biodiversity in making an industry sustainable, and that in science, the role of volunteers who had what he called useless hobbies. Among them, he maintained, are the world's true experts. He wrote about how our industrial economy leads us to think that our food comes from the grocery store and our knowledge comes from laboratories, whereas both come substantially from the earth and through our relationships with it. And so he wrote about an ethical approach to the land, not only in farming, but in the design of human communities that provide for preservation of wetlands and other wild spaces. He wrote about how species we call predators, like the wolves, or pests, like the insects, help create and sustain habitats. He wrote about the diversity of the senses among species, a dog's keen sense of smell, for example, and how other species can call our attention to features of our environment we might not otherwise notice. Leopold grew up in Iowa and became a professor of game management at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Of pioneer farmers who settled near his home there, he wrote, Man and beast, plant and soil lived on and with each other in mutual toleration, to the mutual benefit of all. The marsh might have kept on producing hay and prairie chickens, deer and muskrat, crane music and cranberries forever. The new overlords did not understand this. They did not include soil, plants, or birds in their ideas of mutuality. The dividends of such a balanced economy were too modest. They envisaged farms not only around, but in the marsh. An epidemic of ditch digging and land booming set in. The marsh was gridironed with drainage canals speckled with new fields and farmsteads. But crops were poor and beset by frosts, to which the expensive ditches added an aftermath of debt. Farmers moved out, peat beds dried, shrank, caught fire. Sun energy out of the Pleistocene shrouded the countryside in acrid smoke. No man raised his voice against the waste, only his nose against the smell. After a dry summer, not even the winter snows could extinguish the smoldering marsh. Great pockmarks were burned into field and meadow, the scars reaching down to the sands of the old lake, peat-covered these 100 centuries. The cranes were hard put, their numbers shrinking with the remnants of unburned meadow. The high priests of progress knew nothing of cranes and cared less. What good is an undrained marsh anyhow? Economists and planners came to look at the marsh. Surveyors, technicians, CCCs buzzed around. A counter-epidemic of reflooding set in. Government bought land, resettled farmers, plugged ditches wholesale. Slowly, bogs are re-wetting. The fire pox become ponds. Grass fires still burn, but they can no longer burn the wetted soil. All this, once the CCC camps were gone, was good for the cranes, but not so the thickets of scrub that spread over the old burns, and still less the maze of new roads. To build a road is so much cheaper, simpler, than to think of what the country really needs. Thus, always does history, whether of marsh or marketplace, end in paradox. The ultimate value in these marshes is wildness, and the crane is wildness incarnate. But all conservation of wildness is self-defeating. For to cherish, we must see and fondle, and when enough have seen and fondled, there is no wildness left to cherish. So much for industry and science. In the science of economics, the wildness that Leopold calls the ultimate value in the marshes is labeled an externality and ignored. As he says, so much simpler. In another essay titled Wildlife in American Culture, Leopold listed 3 kinds of valuable experience that can help us reconnect with wildness. First, he says there is value in any experience that reminds us of our distinctive national origins and evolution, that stimulates awareness of history. For example, a Boy Scout has tanned a coonskin cap and goes Daniel Booning in the willow thicket below the railroad tracks. He is reenacting American history. He is, to that extent, culturally prepared to face the dark and bloody realities of the present. Second, there is value in any experience that reminds us of our dependency on the soil, plant, animal, man food chain, and of the fundamental organization of the local habitat. We fancy that industry supports us, forgetting what supports industry. Third, there is the value of any experience that exercises those ethical restraints collectively called sportsmanship. Sportsmanship is a voluntary limitation that is aimed to augment the role of skill and shrink the role of gadgets in the pursuit of wild things. A peculiar virtue in wildlife ethics is that the hunter ordinarily has no gallery to applaud or disapprove of his conduct. Whatever his acts, they are dictated by his own conscience rather than by a mob of onlookers. But Leopold adds, voluntary adherence to an ethical code elevates the self-respect of the sportsman, but it should not be forgotten that voluntary disregard of the code degenerates and depraves him. It does seem these days that what Leopold in that passage calls sportsmanship is lacking in many fields of our collective life. We focus a lot on how divided we are. We might equally assess how unsportsmanlike we have become in Leopold's sense. It is not hard to think of examples in the news where ethical codes have been voluntarily disregarded. Leopold had a hard word back in the 1940s for government-led conservation. I guess the government back then wasn't listening to professors of game management as much as he would have liked. I doubt the current regime would do better, but I suppose his answer would be to restore a balance of development and conservation based on what the land and its habitats can bear. And for us all to learn what that is and let it restrain us like good sportsmen, whatever our walk in life. He wrote of a balanced economy. Today we are learning what it means to participate in resistance with balance. We pursue efforts we are able to sustain to preserve democracy and the rule of law, balanced against activities that renew our connections to joy, to love, and to truth. Natural truth, ethical truth, social truth, spiritual truth. May we each tend our inner spiritual habitats, the better to tend our social habitat and the earth. So may it be. Amen.
I invite you to remain standing as I invite Martha back up to extinguish our chalice as we join together in saying our closing words. Go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings.
And may you tend your connections to joy, love, and truth.
I